There was a time when a man could sit alone with his thoughts and not panic. Now? Silence feels like punishment to most people. The average man today cannot sit in a room by himself for 30 minutes without reaching for a phone, opening social media, checking notifications, watching another podcast, or looking for another crowd to tell him what to think. And that right there is part of the reason so many modern men feel mentally weak, emotionally fragile, and completely disconnected from themselves. Because somewhere along the line, men forgot how to stand alone. They forgot how to think independently. They forgot how to trust their own judgment. And now entire groups of men move like frightened herds, constantly looking around for social approval before they say anything, believe anything, or do anything. Modern men are surrounded by noise, but starving for identity. Everybody wants to belong to something now. A political tribe. A movement. An online community. A fandom. A group chat. A podcast cult. A social media ideology. Some men cannot even form an opinion until they hear their favorite influencer tell them what the approved opinion is first. That is not strength. That is intellectual dependency. And the scary part is that many men do not even realize they are trapped inside it. You can see it everywhere online. A man says something slightly different from the collective, and immediately the mob appears. Not because the mob actually thought critically about the issue, but because disagreement terrifies people who have no internal foundation. Weak men fear standing alone because standing alone forces you to meet yourself. And a lot of men are terrified of themselves. Terrified of silence. Terrified of uncertainty. Terrified of not being validated. Terrified of having no audience clapping for them. So instead, they disappear into group identity because it feels safe there. The group tells them who the enemy is. The group tells them what words to use. The group tells them what opinions are acceptable. The group tells them who to hate, who to praise, and what to pretend to care about this week. The individual disappears. And once the individual disappears, real strength disappears with him. Because real strength has always been connected to independent thought. Look throughout history, the men who changed the world were usually isolated in some way. Philosophers, inventors, writers, explorers, revolutionaries, artists, scientists. These were not men constantly begging the crowd for approval. Many of them were mocked, rejected, misunderstood, or completely alone during parts of their journey. But modern culture trains men to fear isolation like it is death. Everything today is designed to keep people psychologically attached to the crowd. Algorithms reward conformity. Social media rewards outrage. Online culture rewards mimicry. Even many friendships today are built on performance instead of honesty. People do not ask, "What do I truly believe?" They ask, "What belief will keep me accepted?" That is a completely different mindset. And when a man lives his entire life trying to avoid rejection from groups, he slowly becomes mentally weak without realizing it. Because now his identity depends on external validation. Now he cannot think without consensus. Now he cannot act without permission. Now he cannot stand alone without feeling anxious. That is why so many men today crumble emotionally the second life gets uncomfortable. Because they never built themselves internally, they built themselves socially. And social identities are fragile. A man who only feels strong when surrounded by agreement is not actually strong. He is borrowing emotional security from the crowd. Take the crowd away and suddenly he has no idea who he is. That is why loneliness destroys some people while solitude strengthens others. There is a difference. Loneliness is when you need people to escape yourself. Solitude is when you know yourself well enough to not need constant distraction. Modern men are overstimulated but underdeveloped internally. Many men know more about internet drama than their own minds. They know every celebrity controversy, every political argument, every trending topic, every influencer scandal, but they have no idea what they actually think about life when the noise stops. And the noise never stops anymore. That is intentional. A distracted man is easier to control. A man who cannot sit quietly and think independently will always be vulnerable to manipulation. He will chase trends instead of truth. He will imitate instead of create. He will conform instead of question, and many men today have become addicted to psychological safety. They want the comfort of consensus. They want guaranteed approval. They want their opinions prepackaged and socially protected. But growth does not happen there. Strength does not happen there. Character does not happen there. You build character when you can stand on your own convictions without needing a crowd behind you. That does not mean becoming arrogant or refusing to learn from others. Independent thinking is not about pretending you know everything. It is about developing the courage to examine ideas for yourself instead of blindly inheriting them from tribes. A weak man asks, "What are people saying?" A stronger man asks, "What is actually true?" Those are two completely different mentalities. And unfortunately, many modern men were never taught how to develop themselves independently. They were taught how to fit in. From a young age, many boys learn that acceptance matters more than authenticity. They learn to suppress parts of themselves to avoid rejection. They learn to follow social trends to survive socially. They learn that standing out can get them mocked, isolated, or attacked. So they become socially adaptive instead of internally grounded. Then adulthood arrives, and now they have no real identity outside of external feedback. This is why so many men today constantly need entertainment, validation, relationships, substances, or online communities just to feel emotionally stable. Because they never learned how to simply exist with themselves. And if you cannot exist with yourself peacefully, you will spend your entire life escaping yourself. That is where a lot of weakness comes from. Not physical weakness. Internal weakness. Psychological dependency. A man who always needs a group to reassure him is emotionally vulnerable whether he realizes it or not. And what makes this worse is that modern culture often shames individuality while pretending to celebrate it. People say, "Be yourself," until yourself disagrees with the collective. Then suddenly conformity becomes mandatory again. Think about how quickly mobs form online now. One wrong opinion. One unpopular thought. One disagreement with the social script, and suddenly thousands of strangers are emotionally collapsing because someone dared to think independently. That level of emotional instability is not strength. It is herd psychology. And herd psychology has always been dangerous because crowds rarely think deeply. Crowds react emotionally. An individual can pause and reflect. A crowd usually wants immediate emotional satisfaction. That is why groupthink becomes so powerful. It removes the burden of critical thinking. The group thinks for you. The group decides for you. The group validates you. All you have to do is obey. And many men unconsciously choose this because thinking independently is difficult. Standing alone is difficult. Questioning popular narratives is uncomfortable. Building your own philosophy takes effort. But avoiding that work comes at a cost. You lose yourself. And once a man loses himself, life becomes extremely unstable because he is now emotionally dependent on forces outside of his control. If society approves of him, he feels good. If society rejects him, he collapses. If his group changes beliefs, he changes beliefs overnight. If his community panics, he panics too. That is not freedom. That is psychological slavery with better marketing. One of the most important skills a man can develop is the ability to think clearly without needing constant agreement from others. That ability changes everything. Because once a man becomes comfortable standing alone mentally, emotionally, and philosophically, he becomes far harder to manipulate. He stops chasing every trend. He stops panicking over every public opinion wave. He stops needing strangers online to validate his existence. He develops an internal center. And that internal center is becoming increasingly rare today. Many men today are externally connected but internally hollow. Thousands of followers. No self-awareness. Constant stimulation. No clarity. And this emptiness creates anxiety because deep down many people know they are performing versions of themselves instead of actually living authentically. That is exhausting. Pretending always becomes exhausting eventually. And this is why some of the strongest men throughout history often spent long periods alone. Not because isolation itself magically creates wisdom, but because solitude removes distraction. When you are alone, there is nobody to perform for. Nobody to impress. Nobody to imitate. You meet yourself directly, and many people avoid solitude because that encounter can be uncomfortable. Suddenly all the distractions disappear and now you must confront your fears, insecurities, regrets, confusion, and contradictions. But that confrontation is necessary for growth. You cannot develop depth if you constantly drown yourself in noise. Modern culture sells endless distraction because distracted people are easier to influence. Think about how uncomfortable silence has become for many people. Even walking through a grocery store now, everyone has headphones in. Constant audio. Constant content. Constant stimulation. Nobody wants to hear their own thoughts anymore. And maybe that is part of the problem. Because a man who cannot hear his own thoughts clearly will eventually lose his ability to think independently altogether. This is why learning to stand alone matters so much. Not because isolation makes you superior, but because dependence makes you weak. There is a difference between valuing relationships and psychologically needing constant external reinforcement just to function. Healthy men can connect with others without losing themselves. Weak men disappear into the group completely. And many modern men do disappear. They borrow personalities from influencers. They borrow opinions from podcasts. They borrow identities from online communities. They borrow purpose from trends. But eventually borrowed identities collapse because they were never truly yours to begin with. At some point every man has to ask himself a difficult question: who am I when nobody is watching? Not online. Not in a crowd. Not in a relationship. Not inside a political tribe. Not inside social approval. Just you. Alone, because if a man cannot answer that question honestly, then he probably has more self-discovery to do than he realizes. And this is not about becoming antisocial or rejecting community completely. Humans are social creatures. Brotherhood matters. Friendship matters. Connection matters. But connection should strengthen individuality, not replace it. A strong group is made of strong individuals. A weak group is made of emotionally dependent followers. And unfortunately, modern society produces a lot of followers because followers are easier to manage than independent thinkers.